Hello to the students who are online. I hope you can see me and hear me. Can you all see me and hear me? Could somebody give a sign?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I ask you to please not disconnect until the end of the lesson because I have to take your names and I'm not sure I have taken everybody's name. Okay, so just I have 19 attendants, including the student office. So there's 18 students connected online. Please remain online until the end of the lesson so that I can take your names. Okay, so I will begin by sharing the lesson. I hope you can see my slides. I ask the students who are online, if you have questions or if there's something wrong with the connection, please interrupt me with your voice because we cannot see you from here. Okay, so speak out if there's anything wrong. Okay, so okay, there's two students missing, so we are waiting just 1 minute to see if they join us. Lei è quale delle due Sofie? Iaselli. Okay. So once everybody's settled, we start. Okay, great. So, welcome to this edition of I think it's like the fourth edition of the scientific writing course for the Virgilio program. And so I hope we will enjoy a few days together. And I always start this course by two statements, which are apparently in opposition one to the other, but in reality, they're saying the same thing. And I think they summarize the reason why this type of course is helpful, if not necessary. The first statement is by Francis Crick. Now, you all know who Watson and Crick are, right? And Francis Crick was, aside from being a great scientist, Nobel Prize scientist, he's also an excellent writer. And he wrote a few novels, some of them they were autobiographic about the discovery of DNA, like this one, The Astonishing Hypothesis, to be precise. But he also wrote other books, and he is an excellent writer, very enjoyable to read. And this is his statement: there is no form of prose more difficult to understand and more tedious to read than the average scientific paper. Said by Francis Crick, okay, not by any old anybody. And I think we can all agree to that. I mean, sometimes when we have to read five papers, we put our hands in our hair and it's like, oh my God, this is going to be hell. And it shouldn't be like that. I mean, we're scientists. We're all doing this because we like it. I mean, we like science. We enjoy the process of working in science. We enjoy conferences. We enjoy listening to good speakers. That's another skill that's not included in this course, but speaking is also a skill. You can be very entertaining, even talking about relatively flat data, and you can be very boring even when you convey a Nobel Prize discovery. Okay, so speaking is another skill that should be learned, not in this setting, but writing is definitely a necessary skill. You cannot be a good scientist if you do not learn how to communicate appropriately through writing. Everything in science goes through writing. Okay, the papers you're going to publish, the papers you're going to read, the grants you're going to apply for, the grants you're going to obtain or not obtain. So you have to learn how to write appropriately. So that's one statement. The other one goes in the other direction and says complexity of thought need not lead to impenetrability of expression. So there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that cannot be rendered understandable to everybody. Okay. And this is a skill that we have to eat for however complicated the science that you're doing may be. You can always explain it to somebody in simple words. Now, most of the time, you're not going to be challenged to explaining it to the lay population. This might happen, huh? This might happen. We will go through that when we do the grant writing course, because many funding agencies, for example, expect you to disseminate their mission, which means going around to schools or to, le piazze and talking about your research. And so that has to be done in a way that's easy to understand. But right now we're talking about writing, okay? So the first message here is papers are generally boring, badly written, or written complicated, if not badly, okay? They're very complicated and heavy. It's heavy literature. And it shouldn't be like that. It should really not be like that because everything can be made easier, okay? So that's one of the points. So, what is good writing? What's a definition of good writing? Communicating your ideas or your results clearly and effectively. So, what is it that makes a good writer? What's the difference between somebody who knows how to write well and somebody who's not a good writer? Is it talent? Is it inspiration? Is it some other X factor that you have to have? Not really. Not in science, at least, okay? Certainly, if you have talent for writing, that's good for you, okay? That's an added benefit, but it's not essential. You can learn. Actually, good writing is hard work. Okay, it's hard work. That's what it is. And you have to, buongiorno, you have to make the effort. You have to learn a few techniques, a few, yeah, techniques for effective writing. And that's what I hope I will be teaching you in these days. And then you have to be careful to apply them in every possible situation where it's appropriate. Okay. So, what is it that actually makes a good writer in science? The first thing is having something to say. And here I cannot help you, obviously. This depends on your data, on the research that you're doing, on your results. It depends on you. And at this stage of your career, probably more on your supervisor than on you. Okay. But that's something that in this course I cannot teach you. Okay. But if you have nothing to say, don't even try to sit down and write a piece of scientific writing. Okay, without results, no matter how good you are at writing, you won't be able to mask the fact that there's nothing there. Logical thinking. Okay, so in science, when you read a scientific paper, it makes a lot of a difference if it is logically built. So first paragraph leads to the second and leads to the third. That makes it easier to read. Okay, so sometimes, especially at the beginning of our career, we tend to be attached to chronology, the way we performed the research. So the first thing I did was to do this, and then I did that, and then I went back to doing another experiment that really was, referred to the first thing because of a result that I got later on. And sometimes in science, we work in a way that's not totally linear. That's normal. You do one experiment, it leads you to think something else, and then it leads you to go back and redo an experiment you did a year ago because your results are conflicting, right? Or because you found something new and you missed a point or whatever. That's not the way the paper should be written. You have to write a story that's easy to follow. It should be logical. So once you have all your results, you have to put things down in a way that creates a logical flow, regardless of the chronology of your experiments, okay? We will go back to this tomorrow when we talk about actually writing a manuscript. So logical thinking is very important. And then there are a few simple, learnable rules of style. Now, the rules of style in writing are, you can apply them more or less to anything, to scientific writing, to creative writing, to grant writing, whatever. But scientific writing does have a few rules of its own, okay? And that's exactly what we're going to go through in these next few days. So the good news is that good writing can be learned. And of course, the main way to learn is through exercise. Okay, there's no theory that can help you there. You have to write and write and write. And the more you write, the better you're going to get. Okay. And in fact, the reason why I asked you to do this pre-work, which unfortunately at your stage, you generally when I deliver this course, I ask each individual student to send me in an abstract of their project, and we work individually. Unfortunately, you still don't have individual projects maybe you do, but I mean, not all of you. So it's a bit difficult at this stage to ask you for an abstract of your project. And the only time I tried with undergraduate students, what I received were abstracts written by their supervisors, which is not the point of the exercise. Okay, so we're not going to be talking about science in this course. We're all scientists, of course, but we're not going to be talking about science. I'm not going to go into the substance of what you wrote in your commentaries. It's the writing that interests us, okay? So and the reason why I asked you for the commentary is precisely because we need to do something practical. You need to put into practice a little bit of what you learn. Otherwise, it's not going to stick with you. Okay. So the aim of this course is, in a few words, to teach you how to write papers that you would like to read. Okay. Remember that always when you write something. Would I enjoy reading this if I were a reader, the average reader? Or is this impossible to go through? Okay. Because sometimes when you write down a sentence, to you it's very logical, but even as you're writing it, you realize that no, this is going to be complicated. And it's for one of the many reasons that I will be telling you about. So scientific writing should be easy to read, and it should also be enjoyable to read. Why not? Okay. So these are the aims of that you have to have when you sit down and write anything, from your thesis to a manuscript to a grant application. Try to make it enjoyable for your reader. And there are a lot of statistics that show that actually well-written papers get read more often, they get more citations, so it does good to your CV as well. You're going to prefer a manuscript that's easy to read to one that's really complicated. And so that's the reference that you're going to put in your paper. Okay. So you get more citations, you get more H-index, you get more whatever all these various numbers are. Okay. So I want to specify that this is not an English grammar course. So I'm not going to be teaching you the verbs or the this or the that. We will, however, have a small module this afternoon if we manage to get there, or else tomorrow, to talk about the most common grammar mistakes that people make, particularly in scientific English. Okay, in the words that we use often or the phrases that we often put in our papers, sometimes they're not right, sometimes they're downright wrong, and sometimes they're just not elegant, or they could be substituted by something more effective. So at this point, I'd like to introduce myself. Why me? I mean, why am I delivering this course? I'm not a scientific writer. I am a full professor of medical genetics at the University of Milano, La Statale. And I'm a scientist. I'm an experimental hematologist. I've been studying leukemias for the past 30 or so years, okay? I work at the European Institute of Oncology, where I lead some independent research. So why am I doing this, okay? The answer is easy, and the answer is called flattery, lusinga. So I wrote several papers, of course, in my career. I also wrote a book. I'm also doing creative writing as a hobby. This is something that has nothing to do with science. And some friends of mine, a lot of friends of mine actually, oh, you're so good at writing. You write so well. And, so of course, everybody likes this kind of stuff, right? So it's flat. The real objective was to get me to do a course in scientific writing in the PhD program that we have in our campus, because the professional scientific writer who was previously delivering the course left. So there was like nobody willing to do it. And so they covered me with compliments about how well I write, and then convinced me to do this course, right? And I said, yeah, of course I can do it. Then I realized that actually knowing how to do something is very different from knowing how to teach it. Okay. So once I sat down and said, okay, so what am I going to tell these people for 10 hours in a row or whatever? I realized that I was not ready for that. Okay. So I had to take a course. I had to take a course myself. And I did it online at Stanford University, a course called Writing in Science, which I did it in 2017. It was it was a 3-month course. So, I mean, I worked a lot to do this. And I saw that it was taken offline and now it's online again. And actually, I have to acknowledge that I did take a lot of material. A good part, especially of today's lesson, is taken from that particular course. Okay, so I'm not giving you something that I invented off the cuff of my mind. And I got a diploma here, you see, actually with CMEs and all the rest. Okay. So these are other sources aside from the Stanford course that I have used to put together this course. I did not double check if they're all still active. I usually do every year. The best one is, if you're interested, is this collection of articles in a journal called Clinical Chemistry that are very, very well done, and they lead you through the whole process of scientific writing. There are also some books which I bought, and I took pieces here and there from that. The first two are not specific to scientific writing. It's on writing well, it's about writing in general, or the elements of style. That's also applicable to any kind of writing, while the other two are more specific to scientific writing. What happened here? Okay, that's okay. So we will, not we ill, we will work a lot through examples. Okay, so one of the best ways to show you how to make something good is to show you a badly written sentence and then pinpoint what it is that's wrong with it and then make it right. And of course, I took a lot of generic things to show you generic mistakes, but I did take some paragraphs from scientific papers, okay, that according to me are badly written or that are objectively badly written. And of course, in that case, I want to specify that I took away the citations, okay? This is a wrong practice. It's almost plagiarism, but the point is it's not nice to talk, to criticize other people's stuff. It's very easy for you to go and find them if you want. All you have to do is copy paste in Google and the article will come out. But that's not the point of this course, okay? So we're not talking about, besides, there are papers taken from excellent journals. So we're not criticizing the science or the substance of it. It's just that they're very badly written, okay? So I deliberately omitted the citations. It's not a mistake. So this is the program which you should have received. We have let's say we will meet 4 times. Today is 1. Now, I have 2 different versions of the program. Actually, this is my mistake, but in one it said from 14 to 18 and the other one from 14 to 17. So I don't know exactly what you guys received. Is it 3 or 4 hours today? I'm not sure. Like what? Fino alle 5? Okay, so it's 14 to 17, it's correct. And we will go through the basic principles of effective writing. So today you will see what the techniques are. If we manage, because it can become a bit long, we will talk about grammar mistakes. Otherwise, we will do that tomorrow. Then tomorrow we will go into writing an original manuscript. So the different sections of a manuscript, what are they? What are their characteristics? How you write them well, and what mistakes you can make. And then I have a brief lesson on plagiarism and copyrights. This is not in this setting, it wouldn't be obligatory, but it is, for example, in PhD programs, it's an obligatory module. Plagiarism, as you know, is an issue in any field, actually, of creativity, writing, singing, music, whatever. And so there's not really that much to say about plagiarism, in the sense that it consists of copying other people's work or ideas without citing them, so pushing them off as your own. And the easy way to avoid it, because that's the whole point of the lesson, is just don't do it. Okay, just don't copy. So it could be a very short lesson. In reality, it's becoming increasingly difficult to define plagiarism in science. In fact, you must all have read in the papers recently about the scandal, the case of the director of Harvard University who had to resign because of plagiarism in her PhD thesis. And it's kind of like borderline if you go and see the exact detail of what happened. Then there is, of course, the advent of ChatGPT and similar artificial intelligence mechanisms to write, which is making the definition of plagiarism increasingly difficult to pinpoint, okay? And there are different trends of thought. There are extreme people who say, why is it wrong to copy if you're just saying the same thing? Which is reasonable. And then there are other people saying, no, there are a million ways to say it. You say it your way, I say it my way, which is also reasonable. So we will talk about these things which are not resolved yet, okay? So the only guideline I can give you at the moment is to avoid plagiarism because it is still considered malpractice. Okay, then on Wednesday, my idea was to perform some exercises. I always do some exercises all together in the classroom. It's going to be a bit difficult with the people online, but we can still do it online as well. We've done it other times. Just to make sure that you have at least partially understood the things that I've been talking about in the previous 2 days. And then I will give you some time, if there's time left over, for you to rewrite your commentaries. Otherwise, you have to do it on your own time. The point is, having seen the mistakes and having learned how you should write, read your commentary again and see what was wrong with it, okay? I will be sending you feedback on your commentaries, of course. I will probably be sending you the feedback on Wednesday, not before, so that you don't get distracted. And so you will have my feedback. You will have, I hope, learned something new. And you rewrite your commentary on the basis of what you already wrote. I will give you precise instructions about that as well. And however, please send it to me within the evening. Okay, I still haven't received one of the commentaries from group 5, I think. One of the groups didn't send me their commentary. I have, there's 6 groups and I received 5 of them. So please do that today because otherwise you won't get any feedback. And so then you have a free day. You have a free day because I have to reread your commentaries and put together something for Friday. And Friday we will meet and discuss what happened before and after with the pieces of writing that you sent me. Okay. And of course, any questions, any issues that come up can be discussed. Okay, so let's go into let's start with effective writing. What do we mean by effective writing and how do we obtain it? I will start immediately with an example. This is taken from a Cell paper, so definitely a high-tier journal. This is the first sentence of the introduction of a Cell paper, the first 2 sentences. Dysregulation of physiologic microRNA MER activity has been shown to play an important role in tumor initiation and progression, including gliomagenesis. Therefore, molecular species that can regulate MER activity on their target RNAs without affecting the expression of relevant mature MERs may play equally relevant roles in cancer. Okay, so is this easy to understand? Not really. You have to read it twice, okay? Is it enjoyable and interesting to read? I would say definitely no. Does it invite you to continue reading the paper? Not unless you really have to, okay? Not unless you really need it. So this is an example of a badly written piece of science that could be made very easy, okay? And we will see what's wrong with it specifically. And that way you will see already immediately what are some of the things that you can do to make your writing better. Sorry, I have to drink. So, first of all, the use of vague words, which should always be avoided in science. Science is not vague. And the moment that you start putting in stuff, words that are like important, natural, stuff that doesn't really mean anything specific, you start losing effectivity. Okay. So dysregulation of physiologic, that physiologic microRNA, what does that mean? MicroRNAs are physiologic. I mean, so, or molecular species also doesn't mean anything. Be precise. What molecular species, if necessary? Another, and this is very, very typical in science, is the excessive use of jargon, that is technical language, very technical language, or acronyms. Okay, acronyms should really, we all use them, we have to. For example, I'm a geneticist, so gene symbols are acronyms. I mean, I can't help using them. But you have to really try to keep them to a minimum, to the minimum necessary. Okay, the rest should be real language, not technical or acronyms. In this case, the author even decided to invent a new acronym for something that's already an acronym. Okay, so microRNA, RNA is an acronym, okay? And so microRNA, if anything, has an acronym which is widely accepted, which is miRNA, okay? So MER is something that you put like a prefix to specific microRNAs, like MER7B, MER whatever, okay? But using MER like that is not conventional, it's not usual, and definitely unnecessary at the beginning of a manuscript, okay? The passive voice, we will talk a lot about this. The passive voice should always be avoided for many reasons that I will explain at length later on, so I'm not going to go into this, but it immediately makes a sentence heavy. If you decide to use the passive voice, a sentence is by definition, boom, it gains 10 kilograms, okay? And in this case, it can easily be rendered active. Also, another thing which is often done in science and which should be avoided as much as possible, it's not always avoidable, but it is in 95% of cases, is to turn a verb into a noun. This is something that's called nominalization, turning another word into a noun. So dysregulation comes from the verb dysregulate, initiation from initiate, progression from progress, expression from express. And you will see through many examples, I even have a little video about it, that if you turn back these words into verbs, immediately your sentence changes pace, okay? So these are heavy nouns, and putting 4 of them in 2 sentences is really an excess. Another thing that we will see you should be careful of is to put a huge distance between the subject and the verb. Okay, so when you read, you are instinctively waiting for the action, even if you don't know. Okay, so you read the subject and you're waiting for the verb. So everything that comes between the subject and the verb, you kind of read with your breath, holding your breath. So this is something that can, again, easily be avoided, and it immediately makes it more understandable. And finally, just generally speaking, verbosity. This is long. These 2 sentences are not saying almost anything. They're saying a very simple concept. Why make it so long? Okay. So you could simply turn it into something like changes in microRNA expression play a role in cancer, including glioma. Therefore, events that disrupt microRNAs from binding to their target RNAs may also promote cancer. Okay, so this is 48 words, as you see, and these are 26, and yet they're saying the same thing. Not only the second form is much easier to understand, okay? So, in summary, from what I told you about these 2 sentences, the basic principles of effective writing are 3, and if I had to keep one slide from the whole course, it would be this one. Be concise, as short as possible. Be clear, choose the easiest words possible. Be smooth. So, introduce the kind of language that's not jumpy from one thing to the next, okay? So these are the 3 things. And perhaps out of these, the most important is to be concise. Remember that people will always prefer a short piece of writing to a longer one. I mean, think about it yourself. If you have to read for tomorrow a review about something that you know nothing about, are you going to choose a 4-page review or a 12-page review? Of course, you're going to choose the 4-page review. Now, not necessarily all of the information is going to be, of course, it can be, but you're basically going to get the knack of it even with the 4-page review. You might be missing some details, right? And in general, if you're ever going to be a reviewer, and if you continue working in science, you will be a reviewer because that's normal, reviewer for papers or for grants or whatever. If you receive something short, you're going to be loving the authors immediately, okay? So be as short as possible. So how can you achieve these 3 tasks? Okay, to be concise, to be clear, and to be smooth. The first thing is to reduce. So we will learn how to cut. Cut out everything that's not strictly necessary to convey your message. Use the active voice. Using the active voice, by the way, as we will see, also makes sentences shorter, generally, not always. Write with verbs, and this means, of course, avoid nominalizations, use the right tense, place the verb in the right place of the sentence. We will see all these things in more detail. Write good sentences. Sentences have to have a defined structure, and there are good sentences and there are bad sentences. In Italy, we are very used to very long sentences. English language does not carry long sentences. So oftentimes you have to break them into two if you're translating directly from Italian, okay? To make things clear, because clarity is one of your three objectives, right? And then write good paragraphs. Paragraphs also have a defined structure, so it's important to know what it is. And a paragraph can be very clear or very messy, depending on how you put together the sentences, okay? So we will go through that as well. And of course, as George Orwell said, break any of these rules sooner than saying something outright barbarous. In other words, there is in writing, as opposed to any other course that you will take, I guess, there is really no right or wrong. Okay, it's subjective. There are some rules of style, and we like to call them rules, but it's just techniques that you can use to make things simpler, to make things better. But there are some people who like complicated language, for example. They adore their very complex. They like using weird words, and that's okay. So it's a matter of taste as well. In general, though, especially at the beginning of your career, you have to kind of fly low and try to let's say abide by what the general rules of writing are. So we'll start with reducing, which is perhaps, as I said, the most important technique to learn. So this is taken from a book about writing in general, okay? The secret of good writing is to strip every sentence to its cleanest components, every word that serves no function, every long word that could be a short word, every adverb that carries the same meaning that's already in the verb, every passive construction that leaves the reader unsure of who is doing what. These are the 1,001 adulterants that weaken the strength of a sentence. And they usually occur in proportion to education and rank. Now, this is a problem for all of us, right? Because you are pretty high in terms of in the pyramid of education. I am even higher. So you will probably get a PhD, a specialization or something, and it's true. Think about it, that the more you go on, the more complicated you become in terms of language, even in speaking. Why do people always complain that doctors speak an ununderstandable language, right? It shouldn't be like that. I mean, communication from doctor to patient should be easy to understand for the average patient, but most patients complain. Okay. So, I mean, I have friends, not patients, who call and can you translate this to me in Italian? And they're reading what their doctor wrote, right? Because they don't understand. So we have to make an extra effort because our tendency is to think complicated, speak complicated, communicate in a complicated way. And so that goes into our writing as well. Okay. So with respect to, and you can see this pretty clearly with children, right? Children write simple. I mean, they write simple sentences, right? And the more you go on, the more complex it becomes. And we favor this kind of stuff, huh? Because in school, it is generally favored that you become complex. Now, having a certain property of language is very good. I'm not saying that we should all write like, 10-year-old children, but we tend to go overboard, especially in science. So this is another example. This is the last sentence of the introduction of a review paper, okay? This paper provides a review of the basic tenets of cancer biology study design, using as examples studies that illustrate the methodologic challenges or that demonstrate successful solutions to the difficulties inherent in biological research. Boom, huh? Another nice heavy sentence. So this is a citation that comes from a letter in 1656. So the problem was already known very many years ago. I have only made this letter rather long because I haven't had the time to make it shorter. In other words, being concise takes a bit of effort. You have to think about it, because if this is what you want to say, then you have to convert this into something that's understandable by the general population, okay? And it takes time. So this may be your first draft. When you start writing and you throw things down, this may be what comes out. But you cannot leave it like that if you want people to read you. I mean, I would have left that paper there, right there. Okay? No interest in going on. So how do we cut? The first, I mean, here I'm going to give you a list of things that should be eliminated, and then we will see in practice how that works. Dead weight, what are called dead weight words and phrases like, as it is well known, as it has been shown, it should be emphasized that. How many times have you read this kind of stuff? Millions, okay? And these serve for nothing. They mean nothing. Empty words and phrases like the basic tenets of stuff like important, methodologic, this kind of stuff, they're empty. They're non-specific. They're not adding any specific meaning to the sentence. Long words or phrases that could be made short. This is another thing that we all tend to do, especially coming from Latin languages, okay? Because in Latin languages, we tend to be verbose, okay? But remember, English is a concise language, so try to keep it short. I'll give you a few examples. The majority of is most. A number of is many. Are of the same opinion is agree. Less frequently occurring, rare. All five of the five. Give rise to is cause. Due to the fact that is because. Have an effect on is affect. At this moment of time, this is at this moment in time, this is very trendy nowadays. Now, as well as is and. Okay. Yes. Not really. Formal, I wouldn't say. Scientific writing should be formal. Informal language is to be avoided. No. Yes, because is a perfectly formal word. I mean, in general, if this, due to the fact that could still be acceptable at the beginning of a sentence, but in the middle of a sentence, you say this thing happened due to the fact that something else, actually saying this happened because whatever is even more formal, I would say. Okay. So what else to cut? Unnecessary jargon and acronyms, of course. We cannot cut them all in science, okay? This is, you're going to have some of these, but keep them to the minimum necessary, okay? In abstract writing, this is funny because sometimes I get these abstracts that you don't even need to read them. You just look at the page and you see 20 repetitions of the same acronym, right? It's like, no, this is not working, okay? So you can definitely eliminate at least half of them. In the pieces that we read, gliomagenesis or myrrh were unnecessary words, as you saw. They were turned into something more comprehensible. Repetitive words or phrases, particularly if they're in the same sentence and they mean the same thing. This happens more frequently than you would imagine. Stuff like illustrate and demonstrate in the same sentence. You should compact that into one use. Challenges and difficulties in the last sentence that I read you in the same sentence. They mean the same thing. Successful solutions. Solutions are successful by definition. Otherwise, they're not solutions, right? So unsuccessful solutions don't exist. Okay, another, here I have a video which I think is rather effective. An excess of prepositional phrases. What are prepositional phrases? I will now know. Okay.
Hi, I'm Clancy Clausen with the University of Maryland Baltimore Writing Center, and in this video, we're going to talk about trimming prepositional phrases. Prepositions are tiny words like on, by, in, under, above, etc. that show relationships between other parts of the sentence. For example, in the sentence, the wand is resting on the table, the preposition on describes the location of the wand in relation to the table. On is the preposition, on the table is the prepositional phrase. We've put it in parentheses to make it easier to see. When editing, take a look at your prepositional phrases. They're perfectly grammatical, but if you use too many of them, they can start to clog up your sentence. Take a look at this example. Again, we put the prepositional phrases in parentheses. The reason for the payment of the tuition by the students of the school by the first of the month is that it ensures an on-time deposit of the money into the bank account of the headmaster. Phew. This sentence is full of prepositional phrases. We can get rid of a few by turning them into other things like nouns and adjectives. First, let's take a look at the subject and the verb. What are they? Well, the subject is reason and the verb is. Those aren't very interesting, so let's find a new subject. Let's go with students. So what do the students need to do? Well, we have a payment, which is one of those vampire nouns, so we can make that into a verb pay. And since this sentence is about a reason, we'll say students must pay. So what must students pay? Well, tuition. We don't need school, but we should probably keep by the first of the month. That ensures, that could be to ensure, and we'll keep deposit. We don't need of the money, and we can turn of the headmaster into the headmasters and use that to modify bank account. Okay, so let's see what we have. Students must pay tuition by the first of the month to ensure an on-time deposit into the headmaster's bank account. As you can see, we've really trimmed the sentence down. So there you have it. Keep an eye on your prepositional phrases. I'm Clancy Clausen. Stay tuned for more videos.
Okay. So I think that's pretty clear, right? Okay. Okay, so having seen a few of these things, let's go back to the conclusion of the introduction of our review and see how many things that we could change here, okay? How could this be changed? For example, provide a review is review, the verb, okay? This paper reviews. And it's a nice verb, actually. This paper reviews, rather than provide a review. You see, that's a nominalization again. The basic tense is unnecessary. It can be changed easily. Well, perhaps I can just read the change. Okay, this paper reviews cancer biology study design using examples that illustrate specific challenges and solutions. Okay, you're saying exactly the same thing with half the number of words, and it's much clearer to understand. Okay, what are other tricks for reducing? To eliminate negatives, for example. Words like not harmful means safe, not important is unimportant, does not have, lacks, did not pay attention to, ignored, did not succeed, failed. Now, although the actual meaning of these negative phrases is included in the words that I just pronounced, it's obvious that in some cases, take the last one, for example, something didn't succeed sounds a bit softer that something failed, especially if you are referring it to a result, right? So we attempted to perform some sort of an experiment and it didn't succeed, sounds a bit better than saying it failed. So there are psychological reasons as to why you may want to use a negative in some cases, okay? To kind of like dampen the meaning that's a bit too harsh if you say it the other way. But in general, negatives are always liable of creating confusion. They can all, especially double negatives in a sentence, there's always the risk that you're going to create some confusion. So try to speak in a direct way. For example, they did not believe the drug was harmful. They believed the drug was safe. That's the same thing. And you're cutting a lot of words. Eliminate all the superfluous use of there are, there is. In most cases, sentences that begin or contain with these words could be easily changed by eliminating them. Like there are many ways in which we can analyze the data. We can analyze the data in many ways. The data confirm that there is an association between vegetables and cancer. The data confirm an association between vegetables and cancer. Omit the needless prepositions also. That's there's a lot of, especially from foreigners who are not mother tongue with English, there's an excess of prepositions in sentences, okay? They agreed that it was true, can be said, they agreed it was true. and it's actually correct. The meeting happened on Monday. The meeting happened Monday, and it's perfectly correct, and you're not losing anything. I know that translating from Italian is kind of like you can't omit it, but you can, okay? Avoid unnecessary adverbs. Now this is one of the next two things are, according to me, among the most disturbing things in scientific writing. The excess of adverbs. Importantly, notably, generally. To me, already a sentence that begins with importantly it gets on my nerves, okay? Because if it's not important, why are you writing it? Of course it's important, okay? Notably or generally or whatever. Words that end in ly are adverbs in the English language. It's like the words that end in mente in Italian. And I'm sure that if you ever took any writing course or Italian course, they told you try to avoid those words. I mean, turn them into something else, okay? And in scientific writing, in 99% of cases, you can eliminate these words without losing anything, actually gaining a little bit of crispiness to your writing. The other one is transition words. These are also hideous, okay? Every sentence that begins with indeed, moreover, likewise, furthermore, therefore, nevertheless, this is boring, especially if it's excessive. Now, sometimes you need them, okay? When you have to transition from one concept to the next, that's why they're called transition words. But the point is, if you start every sentence with one of these, either an adverb or a transition word, your writing gets very heavy. Redundant adjectives or adverbs, this I already said somehow, but constructions like he screamed loudly, there was a huge excess, or a tiny miniature are unnecessary. I mean, if you're screaming, it's already loud, so the adverb is unnecessary. If there's an excess, it's huge, okay? It's not going to be a small excess. The miniature is tiny by definition, and so forth. So avoid these redundancies, okay? Avoid all vague words. This is very important. Words like almost, many, some, nearly should not be present in a scientific manuscript. Or perhaps you can include them at some point in your discussion or in your introduction, like there have been many reports about blah, 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 and then you give 5 or 6 references, right? But in your results, for example, these are non-specific words and they should be avoided. Informal language, that's what we were saying before. Stuff like kind of, by the way, a lot, a little. These are terms that you can use when you're talking with your friends. You can perhaps even when you're giving a seminar, if you are showing the data, and you can say, as you can see, there's, I don't know, a lot of whatever. But I mean, informal language should not be included in any form of scientific writing. And also, this is another thing that's very disturbing, people who continuously refer to their own reasoning, okay? So I thought that, I reasoned that, I decided to, who cares? I mean, just show me what you actually did. Of course you decided to, otherwise, why did you do it, right? And continuously referring to what made you think of something, or that's what made you think that it could be of interest, but not the fact that you actually thought about it is pretty implicit. Okay, let's go back to some examples. Anti-inflammatory drugs may be protective for the occurrence of Alzheimer's disease. So what's wrong with this sentence, according to you? Any attempts? Okay, I'll go with the first one. I mean, may be protective for the occurrence of, is that really necessary to use all those words? May protect. That's what it's saying, okay? May protect against Alzheimer's disease. Okay. Another one. Clinical seizures have been estimated to occur in 0.5% to 2.3% of the neonatal population. Here, there's actually even a conceptual mistake, if you want, okay? Because 0.5% to 2.3% is not really an estimate. It's quite a precise value, okay? So if you're saying these values, they actually occur in that range, okay? And then what are the neonatal population? newborns. Okay, so clinical seizures occur in blah, blah, blah of newborns. So you see how much shorter it can become. And you're saying the same thing, and it's actually more pleasant to read. Okay, so let's go to the second point. Using the active voice, we said, is important. So as I said before, good sentences have to convey action. Okay, everybody likes action, even in science, okay? Flat stuff is not interesting. Generally speaking, passive language is boring. That's a fact, okay? I have another little video here. Ah. Oh no, I went to the wrong browser.
Have you ever noticed how some parts of your writing seem to pop, while other parts don't? Well, you can improve those dull sentences if you think about how you structure them. There are two voices in writing, active and passive. In the active voice, the subject of a sentence acts, like Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. The active voice is direct, clear, and easy to read. With the passive voice, the subject is acted upon, like the moon was walked on by Neil Armstrong. Although the passive voice is still grammatically correct, it typically doesn't carry the same energy or clarity as the active voice. For starters, its structure can feel clumsy and unnatural, which makes your writing harder to read. It also tends to use more words than the active voice. Over the course of a document, all those extra words can make your writing drag. Here's how to spot the passive voice. Look for phrases like was visited, has been cleaned, or will be built. Each one has a to be verb, like was, has been, or will be. That's followed by an action that's already happened, like visited, cleaned, or built. The person or thing doing the action comes last, if they're mentioned at all. If you see these parts together, there's a good chance the sentence is in passive voice. Overall, we recommend using the active voice more often than the passive. This will help keep your writing snappy and efficient. Here's how to change a sentence from passive to active. In this example, Jacob is our subject and tossed is the verb. Just move Jacob to the beginning of the sentence, cut out unnecessary words, and rearrange a few others. Now, the money was tossed into the air by Jacob becomes Jacob tossed the money into the air. The delivery is briefer, clearer, and more immediate. Although active voice is incredibly useful, the passive voice is occasionally the better choice. For instance, you may go passive if the actor of a sentence is unknown or irrelevant. In this case, we're interested in the amendment's approval, not who approved them. Passive voice is also great for creating an authoritative tone. It doesn't matter who requires employees to wash their hands, they just need to wash their hands. You may also want to go passive when you don't know who's responsible for the action. For example, the mystery was never solved. The voice you use can make a big difference in your writing. The active voice will often add pep and clarity, but occasionally the passive voice will be your best option. Take some time to choose the voice that fits best, and your writing will almost certainly grow stronger.
That was pretty random, Pete. Bash the guitar.
GCF Global, creating opportunities for a better life.
Okay. So. So when do you use the passive voice? The video already said some cases, like when you don't know who did the action, of course, like the dog was poisoned or whatever. When the actor is irrelevant on the person or thing, or if you're emphasizing the person that's being acted on. Okay, for example, JFK was murdered. So you're not talking about the murderer, you're talking about JFK in this case, okay? When you want to be vague, okay? For example, mistakes were made. You don't want to say who made the mistake. Okay? So you can turn, let's try turning passive sentences into active, okay? This is a passive construction. General dysfunction of the immune system of diabetics has been suggested at the leukocyte level by both animal and human studies. Can you say that a bit louder? You're going well. Yeah. Of- Or yeah, that's occur is not even necessary. Okay, so the point is both human and animal studies suggest, you can even just say, or suggested, you can avoid the have, that diabetics have general immune dysfunction at the leukocyte level. Okay. Another one, a recommendation was made by the DSMB committee that the study be halted. Exactly. And you see how by turning the passive into the active, you're even eliminating one of these awful nouns, okay? You're turning it back into a good verb. So the DSMB committee recommended that the study be halted. Okay. And so turning passive into active not only has the benefit of putting action into the sentence, but it also cuts a lot of words. The first visible light snapshot of a planet circling another star has been taken by NASA's Hubble Space Telescope. Again, this one is easy. NASA's Hubble Space Telescope has taken or took the first visible light snapshot of a planet circling another star. Okay? This one is interesting, and I think we will go back to it perhaps. Increased promoter occupancy and transcriptional activation of P21 and other target genes were observed. So in this case, the subject is not contained in the sentence. So what do? You put a we, in science at least, okay? We observed increased promoter occupancy and transcriptional activation of P21 and other target genes. So there's a lot of fear about using the I we, okay? It's generally recognized that it should not be abused, and it should certainly not be abused. But is it correct to use the I and we? Yes, it's perfectly acceptable, okay? This is taken from the Instructions of Science journal, which is another very prestigious journal, a few years ago, though now they have changed it. However, this sentence was actually in the instructions for authors. Use the active voice when suitable, particularly when necessary for correct syntax. For example, to address this possibility, we constructed a Lambda Zap library. Not to address this possibility, a Lambda Zap library was constructed. So it's pretty clear, okay? So they're telling you use the we. And if you're not convinced, here are a couple of examples that should convince you. This is the original paper by Watson and Crick in 1953 in Nature, which was called Molecular Structure of Nucleic Acids, where they describe the double helix. And it begins, if you look carefully, with, we wish to suggest a structure for the salt of deoxyribose nucleic acid. So if they can do it, you can do it too, right? This is another very famous paper. It's called The Hallmarks of Cancer by Douglas Hanahan and Robert Weinberg. And this one starts with, we have proposed that 6 hallmarks of cancer together constitute an organizing principle that provides a logical framework for understanding the remarkable diversity of neoplastic diseases. So, I mean, these are very big writers, okay? By the way, Weinberg is another excellent writer. So here we're talking about people who write really, really well. Very enjoyable papers. Okay, so what are the exceptions to the use of the active voice? When is it actually appropriate in science to use the passive voice, not only in science? But in science, in the methods section of your manuscript. Otherwise, you would be starting every single sentence with we or I, okay? So also in the methods is the only section where you can kind of neglect style a little bit. People don't read it to read something enjoyable. Methods can't be enjoyable to read. People read the methods only if they need to reproduce your method. And in that case, they're going to be looking for technical detail and not for good prose, okay? So in the methods, what was done is more important than who did it, and so the passive voice is perfectly okay. Readers don't expect prose in the methods, and it also may be very difficult to avoid beginning every single sentence with we or I. So in the methods, you can use the passive voice more freely. Also, if you see a particular section of your manuscript where there's an excess of we or I, if every sentence starts with we or I, you can switch one of them into passive voice just to give it a little bit of a break, right? And also, in some very specific cases, introduction of the passive voice makes the concept clearer. Remember, clarity is one of your priorities, right? So if it, for example, saying we found the value to be X, or the value was found to be X, the second form is clearer, okay? It's more direct. So in some very specific cases, the passive voice is actually preferable. Okay, what do I mean by writing with verbs? That was the third technique for effective writing. Use strong verbs, okay? We'll see what that means. Avoid turning verbs into nouns. I've already kind of introduced this concept. Nominalization is really one of the enemies of scientific writing. Do not bury the main verb. Don't put it too far away from the subject. And choose the right tense. This is very important in scientific writing. Okay, scientific writing does have a code for what tense to use where. And so you should follow that. Otherwise, it becomes confusing, actually. So what do I mean by strong verbs? This is creative writing. It's not scientific. We will then see a little presentation about scientific verbs. Loud music came from speakers embedded in the walls, and the entire arena moved as the hungry crowd got to its feet. We're at a concert here, okay? A rock concert or something. Or the other option is loud music exploded from speakers embedded in the walls, and the entire arena shook as the hungry crowd leaped to its feet. So clearly they're saying the same thing. We just changed three verbs from uninteresting verbs to strong verbs. And the image that you get in your head is very different. Okay. So in science, you can't be that creative. Okay. So you have to keep it a little bit less, but still, there are a lot of verbs that can be used more or less alternatively. Try to alternate and try to avoid very flat, very boring verbs. For example, use the to be verbs as little as you can, okay? Use them sparingly because is, was, are becomes repetitive and boring. And this is an interesting little video actually about the strength of verbs in scientific writing.
To help you think more broadly about the relative strength of verbs, here's an example list of verbs arranged from strong to relatively weak. This list is certainly not exhaustive, but it is a useful model for thinking about verb choice and choosing verbs that are appropriate for your intended tone. Notice that on this list, determine is shown as a more powerful word than observed. I think you'll agree that prove is among the strongest verbs, and it isn't used very often in science and technical writing for this reason. You'll probably rarely, if ever, use the verb prove.
Well, I hope you will, actually, but she's a bit pessimistic. But it is true that the verb prove should be reserved for when you have actual proof of something, okay? Okay, nominalization, as I said, is defined as nouns that are created from adjectives or verbs most of the time. And the point here is to avoid turning verbs into nouns. Now, a little TED video. So we said 5 o'clock. Yeah, no, because this one is a few minutes, so I don't want to, but videos interrupt a little bit the flow. So in general, they wake people up. Now, this one is an American video, mind you, okay? So it's very American style. So excuse if it's a bit corny, but I think it's clear in like all of the TED educational videos are. It's clear in delivering the message. So
Take an adjective such as
Why does
implacable
wait?
or a verb
We can't get rid of this.
like proliferate, or even another noun, crony, and add a suffix such as ity or tion or ism, you've created a new noun, implacability, proliferation, cronyism. Sounds impressive, right? Wrong, you've just unleashed a flesh-eating zombie. Nouns made from other parts of speech are called nominalizations. Academics love them. So do lawyers, bureaucrats, business writers. I call them zombie nouns because they consume the living. They cannibalize active verbs. They suck the lifeblood from adjectives. And they substitute abstract entities for human beings. Here's an example. The proliferation of nominalizations in a discursive formation may be an indication of a tendency toward pomposity and abstraction. Huh? This sentence contains no fewer than 7 nominalizations, yet it fails to tell us who is doing what. When we eliminate or reanimate most of the zombie nouns, so tendency becomes tend, abstraction becomes abstract, then we add a human subject and some active verbs, the sentence springs back to life. Writers who overload their sentences with nominalizations tend to sound pompous and abstract. Only one zombie noun, the keyword nominalizations, has been allowed to remain standing. At their best, nominalizations help us express complex ideas, perception, intelligence, epistemology. At their worst, they impede clear communication. To get a feeling for how zombie nouns work, release a few of them into a lively sentence and watch them sap all its energy. George Orwell played this game in his essay, Politics and the English Language. He started with a well-known verse from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. It says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Now here's Orwell's modern English version. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. The Bible passage speaks to our senses and emotions with concrete nouns, descriptions of people, and punchy abstract nouns such as race, battle, riches, time, chance. Not a zombie among them. Orwell's satirical translation, on the other hand, is teeming with nominalizations and other vague abstractions. The zombies have taken over, and the humans have fled the village. Zombie nouns do their worst damage when they gather in jargon-generating packs and swallow every noun, verb, and adjective in sight. So globe becomes global, becomes globalized, becomes globalization. The grandfather of all nominalizations, anti-disestablishmentarianism, contains at least 2 verbs, 3 adjectives, and 6 other nouns inside its distended belly. A paragraph heavily populated by nominalizations will send your readers straight to sleep. Rescue them from the zombie apocalypse with vigorous, verb-driven sentences that are concrete and clearly structured. You want your sentences to live, not to join the living dead.
Okay, so I warned you it was American, but I think it's very effective in putting the point through. Okay, so let's take a look at a few examples in scientific writing. And if you want now, if you focus this particular issue of nominalizations, you will find them everywhere. It's an incredibly frequent mistake, okay, in scientific writing. So this is a sentence that you wouldn't have noticed before if I hadn't put your attention to it, okay? During DNA damage, recognition of trimethylated H3K4 by Ing2 results in recruitment of Syn3H DAC and repression of cell proliferation genes. This is the average scientific sentence, I would say, right? But it contains actually 4 nominalizations because proliferation is also a nominalization. The point is, though, that cell proliferation is a way of saying things that's very difficult to change. It's a standard, let's say, a standard word in scientific language. And if you want to change that, you would have to go through some acrobatics that would make it awkward. Okay, so you have to use your common sense there. Cell proliferation is a process that's called cell proliferation, and there's not much you can do about it, right? But the other 3 are, in fact, needless nominalizations. Okay, you can change them back into verbs, and the sentence will become much better. For example, during DNA damage, Ing2 binds trimethylated H3K4 and recruits Syn3H DAC, which represses cell proliferation genes. You're saying the exact same thing. You took away all the nominalizations, and the sentence is much easier to read. So here are some suggestions about nominalizations, and which are boring. Okay, you have a weak verb and nominalization, which can be converted into a good verb. Provide a review of, we saw that before. It means to review. Okay. Offer confirmation of, confirm, make a decision, decide, show a peak. Provide a description of, describe, obtain estimates of, estimate, has seen an expansion in, has expanded, provides an emphasis, emphasizes, take or make an assessment of, assess. Okay, so it's in most cases feasible. Okay, so there are some nominalizations which are in fact standard, and you won't go touching them, like cell proliferation, but others are modifiable, generally with good results. Okay. Going back to verbs, 3rd point, do not bury the main verb. So readers, as I said, are waiting for the action. So keep the subject and the main verb close together at the beginning of the sentence. Everything becomes clearer if you do that. For example, one study of 930 adults with multiple sclerosis receiving care in one of 2 managed care settings or in a fee-for-service setting found that only 2/3 of those needing to contact a neurologist for an MS-related problem in the prior 6 months had done so. Okay, so here the subject is one study, the verb is found. You see how many words are in between. And in fact, all those words, even while I was reading it, you're kind of waiting for what happened, and you're not really focusing on what the sentence is saying. This is very easy to move the verb. You can just say there's 23 words between the subject and the verb. That's a lot. One study found that of 930 adults with multiple sclerosis were receiving care in one of blah, 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 only 2/3 of those needing to contact. And so it becomes immediately more understandable. Okay. Another sentence. Major differences in the reaction times of the 2 study subjects were found. As you see, this kind of a problem is often associated with the use of the passive voice. So the 2 things very often go together, that the subject is very far away from the verb. This you could turn easily into, we observed major differences in the reaction times of the 2 study subjects. Here you have to introduce who was the observer. Okay, choose the right tense. In general, in writing, be it creative, scientific, or even letter, when you write, you should keep to one tense. So you decide up front, I want to write in present tense, I want to write in past tense. If you're writing, I don't know, a story, a book, or whatever, that's what you're going to do. But scientific writing has its rules, okay? And they are the following. You have to use the past tense to report your work or other people's work. So this paper showed, I performed. Your results are going to be all written in past tense, okay? And most of your writing is going to be in past tense, actually. Where do you use the present tense? For generally accepted research or knowledge. DNA is a double helix. I mean, you don't need to say it was, okay? It is, it still is. The world is round, at least we think so, most of us, right? So accepted notions, widely accepted notions can be used in present tense, but if you want to refer, for example, to Watson and Crick's specific paper, you will say Watson and Crick demonstrated that, the structure is a double helix, that DNA is a double helix. But if you instead want to refer to the concept itself, you can refer to it in present tense, okay? And the only place where you can use a present tense throughout your manuscript in the results, for example, is when you're referring to the figures. See figure 1, see figure 2. Okay? But if you describe the figure, you're going to use again the past. Oh no, you're going to use the present as is shown in figure 1. Okay? Okay, let's go to sentences. What time is it? Ooh, what happened here? Having issues with lights here. Okay, do you need a break? Okay. Okay, so let's say no, because no, because 3 hours is long. So I see that the attention span goes a bit down. So for those who are following us from home, please don't disconnect so that I can take your names. We will come back. It is now, at least in my watch, it is 15:29, 15:30. Is that true? Yeah. Okay, 10 minutes. Okay, so look at your watch, whatever it is, 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm back. We will wait just a couple of minutes because the students who are present here are not back yet. I will resume the presentation. So where is everybody? Il team 5 mi manca. Team 5 è... So while we're waiting, I wanted to repeat that I still have not received the commentary from group 5, and the people involved are Anastasia Laliotti, Brittany Bacalao, Gaia Giulietti.
Professoressa?
Yes?
Sì, allora sono Antonella, sono parte del gruppo 5. Allora, purtroppo abbiamo mandato la mail praticamente poco fa, una mezz'oretta fa, dovrebbe esserle già arrivata a nome di Anastasia.
Ok.
E il lavoro era già pronto da giorni, purtroppo non ci siamo capiti bene tra di noi, chi doveva mandarla non l'ha mandata.
No, non ha
però...
importanza, l'importante è che l'abbiate mandato.
Sì,
Non
sì,
c'è
sì, dovrebbe
problema.
esserle arrivata già a nome di Anastasia Lalioti. Se non le risulta, gliela faccio rimandare.
Sì, no, è arrivato, grazie. Adesso ce li ho
va
tutti.
bene.
Grazie.
Grazie a lei.
Okay, we start again. There may be somebody missing or no? Okay. Well, so we left off at sentences. Okay, so now we go into, aside from reducing techniques or specific words like verbs, how to construct good sentence. So the sentence is defined as a group of words that expresses a complete thought, and it must contain at least a subject and a verb. So that's an independent clause. If any of this is missing, the verb is missing, the subject is missing, it's called a sentence fragment. Sentence fragments can be acceptable in specific contexts, but they generally are used more in creative writing than in scientific writing, even though sentence fragments, as we will see, can be used in very specific contexts. In creative writing and normal writing, sentence fragments can, for example, give emphasis. Again and again, he called her name. No reply. So no reply is a sentence fragment, but in this particular case, it's very effective to transmit a specific message, right? In scientific writing, you will use sentence fragments in figure legends generally. Okay, like the title of the figure legend, a serial, shRNA screen, whatever. And then you will usually break down your figures into panels, right? So panel A, the schematic representation of the serial enrichment of the shRNA screen. That's a sentence fragment. It's missing a verb. Yet it's acceptable, okay? In general, titles, as we will see tomorrow when we talk about manuscript preparation, can be sentence fragments. Actually, some journals request that titles be sentence fragments. So they are acceptable in specific contexts, but otherwise you should always write full sentences. Sentences have a defined structure. And actually, as you will see, at least I hope from some examples, the order of words matters. Okay, so you can have two sentences that carry exactly the same meaning, but by rearranging the words, you give a different emphasis. The topic position or rather, the information that you put at the beginning of a sentence is called the topic position, and it basically introduces what you're talking about. Okay, so the first part of the sentence should introduce what the sentence is about, the topic of the sentence. And then the last part of the sentence is what linguists call the stress position. So readers naturally emphasize the information that's at the end of a unit of writing, be it a sentence or a paragraph. Okay, if you read a paragraph, what you are actually left with is what's written at the end of the paragraph. And the same goes for a sentence. So that's where you want to put the message that you're trying to convey. Okay, so what it's about is the topic, and then the stress position is at the end of the sentence. So by turning words around, you can slightly change the emphasis of the message that you're giving. Example: introduction of the new assembly line increased manufacturing. Perfectly good sentence, okay? So here we are talking about industry, and we're talking about assembly lines, catene di montaggio, okay? And the authors claim that if you with a new assembly line, it increases manufacturing. If you write it in this form, the readers would assume, what you assume instinctively is that the authors looked at the various effects of the introduction of the new assembly line. So the topic is introducing a new assembly line. And the result, the message was that manufacturing was increased, and that's what they're going to focus on. So what you expect in the next sentence is something about how it increased description about the increase of manufacturing. In any case, that's what they're going to concentrate on. That's the stress position. If you say the same thing, turning the words around, manufacturing increased after the introduction of the new assembly line. What you suppose is that the authors looked at various ways to increase manufacturing, and that they will focus on the introduction of the new assembly line because that's the one that had the greatest effect, and you expect the next sentence to be about the new assembly line. Okay, so even though the meaning is exactly the same, depending on how you put the words, you can build, let's say, more of a logical flow. So how are good sentences structured? You should keep related words together. And the same goes for a paragraph. As we will see, you should keep related sentences together. So keep your thoughts kind of like together. The subject and the verb, as we saw, should not be separated by other words that can be put elsewhere. They should be as close as possible. For example, cast iron, when treated in a Bessemer converter, is changed into steel. So this little phrase here, when treated in a Bessemer converter, interrupts the flow of the sentence in an unnecessary manner, okay? Because you can write, cast iron is changed into steel when treated in a Bessemer converter, and that's more direct. Or, if you prefer, by treatment in a Bessemer converter, cast iron is changed into steel. But still, you are keeping the subject and the verb together, okay? You're not interrupting the sentence. Be careful where you put modifiers. This is very important, okay? The adjectives or adverbs or even clauses that modify a word or make it more specific. Putting modifiers in the wrong position can create ambiguity, and this is very bad in science, okay? Ambiguity is really what you want to avoid. You want to be precise. So I will try to read a couple of sentences. It's difficult because this is what happens when we write and when we read. In our minds, we are listening to the words, right? We are kind of speaking out loud. So when we speak, we can avoid ambiguity because of the tone of voice. But when you write, you don't know how your reader is going to read it, where the emphasis is going to go. So I'll make an example. Cycling up hills quickly strengthens your quadriceps. That has one meaning. If I say cycling up hills quickly strengthens your quadriceps, that has another meaning. Okay, so what does the quickly refer to if you put it in that position? You are creating ambiguity in your writing. So you should put it in a position, when you're writing at least, that's unambiguous. When you're speaking, it's not necessary because you put the emphasis, okay? So you can say, cycling up hills strengthens your quadriceps quickly, and that's clear what it's doing. Or quickly cycling up hills strengthens your quadriceps. These are two different meanings, but by moving the modifier, you make it clear. Another one, I watched him frequently walk around the park. Or I watched him frequently walk around the park. Again, with a voice, you can obtain more clarity, even though this one is ambiguous, even with a voice. Huh? You can say, I frequently watched him walk around the park. So you're the one who's frequently watching. Or I watched him walk frequently around the park. He's the one who frequently walks. Okay, so these are, again, two different meanings. Sentence length, and this is a painful matter with Latin speaking people because we all write very long sentences naturally. In English, as I said, sentences are short generally, and in fact, linguists consider sentence length the key predictor of reading difficulty. Okay. And it is one of the most employed measures of so-called readability. So the readability is the ease with which you can read a piece of writing, right? So beware of long sentences. And if you have doubts, just separate them into two using the correct punctuation. In general, it's more pleasant to read sentences of different lengths, so try to alternate. Okay, so writing is more pleasant to read if it's not monotonous. If the sentences don't all have the same structure or the same length. So I'm not going to show you this video because it's a very long one, but if you want to know more about sentence structure in English, there's the link. So compound sentences are the ones where you have two concepts joined by a conjunction, which is and, but, or something like that, right? So very often we tend to build entire paragraphs that are composed of compound sentences. This is an example that I'm not going to, well, no, I can read it to you. The third concert of the subscription series was given last evening, and a large audience was in attendance. Mr. Edward Appleton was the soloist, and the Boston Symphony Orchestra furnished the instrumental music. The former showed himself to be an artist of the first rank, while the latter proved itself fully deserving of its high reputation, and so on. As you see, this is a sequence of sentences that are all built in the same way. They're all more or less the same length, and in the end, it becomes boring. Okay, so try to put different constructions, alternate between compound sentences, brief sentences, longer sentences, and so forth. Another thing about sentences that's very important, and you will find this in every manual that you consult about any kind of writing, is so-called parallelism. Okay, it's structures, sentences that have series within them, and in science we use them very often. Need to have a parallel structure. This is really a question of right or wrong. Okay, so avoiding if you do not use parallel structure, you're introducing an actual mistake into your writing. So it's not a matter of opinion here. What do I mean by parallel structure? For example, if you want to be a good doctor, you must study hard, think critically about the medical literature, and you should be a good listener. Something is wrong with that, even just, instinctively. So what's wrong with it is that the three highlighted things, which are a series of things, are not in the same form, okay? And they always need to be parallel, in the parallel form. So you choose, you can say, if you want to be a good doctor, you must study hard, listen well, and think critically about the medical literature. So you're using the imperative verbal form. Or you can turn them into nouns if you prefer and say, if you want to be a good doctor, you must be a good student, a good listener, and a critical thinker about the medical literature. You have three nouns. So these are parallel constructions. The first one is not. So how do you identify? Sometimes it really strikes your eye, okay? If you start being careful about this, you will notice the mistake. But how do you make sure that you have a parallel construction? So it's pretty easy. You find the trunk of the sentence, including the verb, and then you write the three branches. Are they coherent? For example, in the example that I gave you, if you want to be a good doctor, you must, that's the trunk of the sentence, study hard, think critically about the medical literature, you should be a good listener. So this jumps, you see, it comes to your eye immediately that this is in a different form from the previous one. So that one is wrong. So you change it, listen well, to the same form as the others. Another thing, which is not always, of course, applicable in scientific writing, is when you are, but it is in the discussion, for example, or in the introduction, when you want to make examples of something, is the so-called rule of three, okay? This is something that linguists have known for a long time. It's a writing principle that suggests that a trio of events or characters is more effective. Okay, it's more humorous, more satisfying, and more engaging to the reader. And in fact, you will find three items in most of the lists that you, even in the previous example. Okay, so generally, writers use the trio. And here are some very famous sentences from equally famous writers. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. Three things, right? There's certainly a lot more than that in terms of the rights that every citizen should have. But they chose three. Friends, Romans, countrymen. This is William Shakespeare, decidedly a very good writer. Julius Caesar. Veni, vidi, vici. Julius Caesar himself, okay? Liberté, égalité, fraternité. This is the slogan of the French Republic. And if you pay attention to this, you will find that the trio is a recurrent usage in writing. Okay, so of course this isn't always applicable for scientific writing. If you are talking about a list of genes that you found mutated in a particular condition, well, if there's 5 of them, it's going to be 5 of them. If you used 6 different techniques, it's 6. Okay, but where you can choose, use the trio. Okay, a little final thing about sentences. Avoid run-ons. What are run-ons? It's basically when you join two sentences without using the correct punctuation or the correct conjunction, right? So if there's more than 2 independent clauses that are not joined properly, that's called a run-on. And things like I love to write papers. I would write one every day if I had the time. This is always wrong. Okay, so be careful about that. Put a comma, put an and, put something that interrupts the run-on. Okay, and the last concept of this first lesson is about paragraphs. Okay, this is a bit of an extension of what we said about sentences. Okay, so the concept is very much the same. A paragraph is defined as a self-contained unit of a discourse in writing dealing with one particular point or idea. So one of the main mistakes that you see about paragraphs is either that one single paragraph contains more than one idea. So in one paragraph, you should only be discussing one thing. If you start discussing something else, you go to another paragraph. And the opposite problem, that you haven't finished discussing an idea and you go to a new paragraph. Well, that also creates confusion because the reader instinctively thinks that you're talking about something else. If you go to a new paragraph, you're supposed to be talking about something new, okay? And in fact, if you split one idea or one concept into more paragraphs, also the paragraph structure is going to end up being wrong because you're mixing things up, okay? So it's important to keep a good paragraph structure also for clarity. So a paragraph should discuss a single idea, okay? This is important. And it should stand on its own 2 feet in the sense that it should be complete. Everything about that particular item should be contained in that paragraph, okay? So what are the characteristics of a good paragraph? First, the first sentence, of course, it has to be catchy, and it's like in a sentence, the beginning of the sentence is the topic position. In the paragraph, the beginning of the first sentence of the paragraph is going to be called the topic sentence. So that's where you introduce what the paragraph is going to be about. The paragraph should have unity, order, coherence, completeness. We will see what we mean by that. And above all, a good conclusion. Remember that readers oftentimes, especially in science, because sometimes, you just want to get a fast read of a paper, you're going to read the first sentence and then you're going to whiz through and go and read the last sentence. So the conclusion is always very, very important. So the topic sentence is a sentence that indicates in a general way what idea the paragraph is going to deal with. Okay, so it's like a brief introduction to what you're going to be talking about. So readers generally look at the first few sentences in a paragraph, so it's best to put the topic sentence at the very beginning of the paragraph. You want to catch your reader's attention. Remember that your objective is to get people to read your stuff, okay? So you have to catch their attention in every way possible. So tell them at the beginning of the paragraph what it's going to be about. In some cases, however, in scientific writing in particular, you need to join what you're going to be talking about to what you were talking about before. So you need what's called a transition sentence. And you find these very often in the results. So the previous experiment showed that blah, blah, blah. And therefore, we decided to perform this other analysis. Okay, and then you start introducing what you actually did. So you might need a transition sentence. Okay, some examples of topic sentences. These are taken from American high school exams or whatever. Okay, so we're not in science right here. So a bad topic sentence would be, Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809. Because aside from the fact that the person is going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln, it gives you no idea as to what to expect. Okay, so it's a weak, I wouldn't say it's awful, but it's definitely a weak topic sentence. A good topic sentence would be, Abraham Lincoln, born in 1809, was one of the most influential politicians in history, because you know what that paragraph is going to be about. Okay, so the person is going to discuss the politics of Abraham Lincoln and what he did and why he was so influential. Another bad one. This one's even worse, actually. This one's really bad. I'm going to discuss the Battle of Gettysburg. Again, no particular clue as to what is coming. A good one would be, the Battle of Gettysburg was the turning point of the Civil War. That catches your attention. Okay. So what do we mean by unity? I repeat this concept because it's really a very, very frequent mistake. A paragraph is unified around one idea, okay, which is expressed in the topic sentence and then gets discussed in the rest of the paragraph. So it has to be one idea. What about the order? A paragraph is structured into 3 parts, we can say. The introduction, which is the topic sentence. You might need even another sentence if the topic is particularly complex. And it serves to give background information or provide the transition from what you were saying before. Then there's the body of the paragraph, where you actually insert what you want to say, supporting sentences, where you discuss or analyze or insert your results if you're in the results section. And you have then to conclude the paragraph with a conclusive sentence that summarizes the connection between the information discussed in the body of the paragraph and the controlling idea of what you're writing. Okay, so why is that particular paragraph important? Remember, that's the message that people are left with. From every paragraph, it's the last sentence, the one that stays with you. Coherence. So flow is a critical element. Every sentence in a paragraph should arise logically from the sentence before it. And every paragraph in a manuscript should arise logically from the one before it. So this is where logic comes in, okay? So create coherence within your paragraphs. Use keywords, for example. Keywords are something that people always neglect, and they are a fundamental tool instead. Okay, so one of the first things that you should identify when you start writing a piece of scientific writing, whatever it is 4, 5, 10, whatever keywords. My keywords are generally acute myeloid leukemia, chromosomal translocations, genetic mutations, or whatever. Try to insert those keywords regularly to create flow, okay? And you can repeat keywords, of course, perhaps not the same keyword over and over, but I mean, you can repeat them all along your piece of writing to create coherence as well, okay? Around a specific theme. So we were always taught to avoid repetition, right? So that's one of the big no-nos in writing. Don't repeat words very often. In science, this is often impossible, okay? And in fact, I have seen some incredible gymnastics to create improbable synonyms of things, okay, that should really be avoided. I mean, some things can only be said in a certain way. And if there's no other plausible, decent way to say it, well, just repeat it, okay? So repetition is acceptable in scientific writing for the sake of clarity. Remember that one of your 3 main aims is to be clear, okay? So if introducing some weird synonym to avoid repetition, well, prefer repetition, okay? And of course, transition words can be used to link ideas from different sentences. Just avoid using them at the beginning of every sentence, okay, as we said before. So use them sparingly in a paragraph. Completeness. Your paragraph should contain everything that you want to say about that particular idea, okay? So don't leave things for the next paragraph. Don't do that, okay? So it should be complete. Usually, this requires something like 3 supporting sentences. So you're going to have a topic sentence, 3 or 4 or whatever, but not more than that, and then a concluding sentence. So an average paragraph is about 5 sentences long. It can be 6 or 7, of course. I mean, there's no definite rule, but that's just to give you an idea of the length, okay? Don't discuss the same idea in different paragraphs. And of course, end your paragraphs effectively. This is perhaps the main point, okay? And this is also one of the weak points in many beginners, okay? So as I said and repeated, readers remember mainly the first and the last sentences of each paragraph. So the first sentence tells the reader what to expect, and the last sentence states the main message of the paragraph or the important consequences, or both. Avoid ending a paragraph with a digression or with an important detail, and this is a mistake that many, many people make. Okay, so when I ask for abstract writing, I generally get these abstracts that finish off with something they didn't do. So the next step is going to be this and that. No, don't do that. I mean, you're committing suicide. You're telling the reader what you didn't do. So what you have to do is convince them that what you did is important, not that you haven't finished what you haven't done. So here's an example. A proteomic evaluation of hummingbirds, so we're talking about birds migrating here, under simulated migratory conditions revealed evidence of several stress-associated processes. Not surprising, must be stressful to migrate. protein degradation in wing muscle tissues, depletion of metabolic cofactors, and enhancement of stress response proteins. So this is a nice sentence, okay? Then the concluding sentence. These results suggest that changes in the hummingbird proteome may provide new insights into the complex physiology of avian system biology. Does this sentence say anything? No. It's also full of what I defined as vague words or empty words, and it basically does not really give any relevance to the results that they were talking about before, or the things that they were talking about before, right? So we can say this conclusion is obvious and unconvincing altogether. What about something a bit more emphatic, like hummingbirds migrate long distances over water without feeding or resting, and it is physiologically stressful. The bird's ability to manage this stress may limit the distance they can migrate. So you're giving some context, okay? So it's a clear conclusion about what the data mean. Migrating is stressful. That's what they're saying. There are many other sentences that you could have used, but the idea is to leave the reader with a clear message, not with something vague. Another one. In summary, we show that X7 alters the expression pattern of extracellular proteases in the flesh-eating bacterium Streptococcus pyogenes, which causes necrotizing fasciitis. If the function of X7 can be fully established, it would likely deepen our understanding of this destructive disease. Again, you're ending the paper by telling your readers what you didn't achieve, okay? So basically, we show that it alters the expression of the proteases, but we don't know what it means. That's what you're saying. So that's not a very strong message that you want to leave. You can say, if you don't know, because sometimes you don't know, and it's not like you can invent, a strong conclusion, but you can at least, I don't know, hypothesize something. This research may offer a route to developing therapeutic agents that would minimize tissue damage while antibiotic treatments were directly attacking the bacterium itself. You can even elaborate by saying by modulating X7 expression or whatever, okay? So you're saying basically that this research might in the future lead or contribute to, with its knowledge, to providing a tool for managing the disease. It doesn't overstate the role of X7 because you don't know the role of X7, so it's not like you can invent it. But it gives a relevance to the results. It doesn't undermine them, okay? It doesn't flatten them out. So basically, from everything I have said so far, I would summarize it with this sentence that comes out of this book. Write to illuminate, not to impress. Use the simplest words and the simplest phrasing consistent with that goal. Okay? Are there any questions or anything not clear? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Everything okay? The pace is fine with you? Okay, so I have to trust the people in the classroom, but if there's anybody connected from remote that has questions or didn't understand something, please let me know. Okay. So let's start at least with the other. Let's see how far I don't think we're going to be able to finish this, but we can definitely start. Okay, as I said, I'm not going to go into a grammar lesson, but just a few tips that are specific mistakes in scientific writing. So English is said to be a simple language in the sense that it has simple constructions definitely compared to other languages it does, but it is full of weird rules and it has a lot of exceptions, okay? And there is not an easy way, as always, to learn exceptions to the rule, okay? So you're taught the rule when you learn the language, but if you apply it in every occasion, you're bound to make mistakes. So you have, and this is something that you can only learn by reading a lot and talking a lot and just practicing the language. So there's not much we can say about that. One of them, just as an example, is I before E except after C. This is a rule that they teach you in school. So you say believe and receive, right? But of course, if you look at science, already you have an exception. I before E after C, or society, or glaciers. And there are many, I think there are 1,000 exceptions to this rule. Another one is, and this one is something that you get familiar with by talking just instinctively, even if you don't know the rule. The adjectives in English have to be in a specific order. And the order is opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose, and then followed by the noun. And you cannot mess around with that order. Otherwise, sentences look very strange, very awkward. So this is an example of a sentence that uses all these adjectives. A lovely little old rectangular green French silver whittling knife. If you mess around with any of that, it's going to sound strange. That's why green, huge dragons don't exist. It would be huge green, okay? Another issue that many people ask is, should I use UK? I mean, if I'm not a native, British or American, should I use UK English or USA English? There are some differences. Both are acceptable in science, equally acceptable. The important thing is that you choose one and you stick to it. It's always very indicative that you're not familiar with the language if you use both in the same piece of writing, okay? So if an author inserts verbs in both the American and the English form, or words that are written differently and alternatively in one form or the other, you're immediately going to be identified as foreign. And they're even going to tell you, because now they become very nasty about it, and they say, go to a professional scientific writer. So try to choose one and stick to it. So these are some of the differences that you might find in scientific. Now, tumor against tumor, color, favor, leukemia, hemeropoiesis, all the verbs that end in eyes. So it's in the UK English uses the S, analyze, realize. The USA English uses the Z, okay? Then there are words that are used only in one of the two settings, like whilst is very British. No American would ever say whilst, or the full stop, or there are words or terms that are used differently. So make sure you choose one and stick to that one. I suggest you use a dictionary. So I am mother tongue English, but I still use a dictionary when I write. Okay, so don't give up on that. I am American English. That's my formation, even though I did go to UK schools, but I didn't catch the accent. Still, I have my dictionary. What's going on with it's normal. Oh, okay, fine. As long as it's not me, but I'm standing still. So these are the best UK dictionaries. These are the best American dictionaries, and you have versions online as well. So you can, it's very easy to consult. For any doubt, go back to the dictionary. So let's take a look at some aspects of grammar in scientific English. The first thing I'm going to show you are the common mistakes. Of course, my common mistakes are a bit focused on Italians, because that's what we are, right? I guess the common mistakes in other countries would be slightly different, perhaps. And if we have time, otherwise I will go through this briefly tomorrow, the correct use of punctuation. Punctuation can really, it's used slightly differently in English as opposed to Italian, and it can really be helpful to gain clarity, especially for the purpose of clarity. The correct use of punctuation is very useful. So the first common mistake, I would say, is the use of that and which that many people use alternatively. But they're not exactly the same thing, okay? So that is the restrictive pronoun, and which is the non-restricting or non-defining pronoun. What does that mean? Is your clause that's being introduced, is the phrase that's being introduced by one of these two words essential for the meaning of the sentence, or is it non-essential for the meaning of the sentence? Because if it's essential, you're going to have to use that. If it's non-essential, you will use which, and you will actually, how do you say, include it in 2 commas. Okay, so it's a sentence that's included in commas, and it's not essential to the meaning of the sentence. So that you use when the clause cannot be eliminated without changing the meaning of the sentence, and we will see what that means. Which is the non-essential clause. So you can take it away without altering the basic meaning of the sentence, and you set it off by commas. So here's an example. The bike that is broken is in the garage. So it identifies one particular bike. Okay, so you want to talk about the bike that's broken, not just any bike. If you instead say the bike, which is broken, is in the garage, you're talking about a specific bike that's in the garage, and you're giving an extra detail about it. It's broken, but that's not the important point. Okay, that's not what you want to talk about. It adds a fact about the only bike in the surroundings, okay? The test tube that contained her RNA was lost. Or the test tube, which contained her RNA, was lost. Again, so in the first case, you are identifying one particular test tube in a group of many. In the second case, you're giving an extra detail about the only test tube that's in the room, okay? So the common mistake is to use the which everywhere, okay? So most people use which in the wrong way. Rarely will you see a that being used and set off by commas, okay? The more frequent thing is that people will instead use defining clauses, will introduce defining clauses with a which, like the test tube which contained her RNA was lost, or without using the commas, so you don't exactly know what's going on, right? And in fact, this is a sentence taken from one of the writing books, general writing books. Careful writers go witch hunting, remove the defining witches, and by doing so, improve their work. So, for example, this one would be wrong. Other disorders which co-occur with diabetes include heart disease and foot problems. So in this case, the which is introducing the phrase co-occur with diabetes. You cannot take that phrase away. Otherwise, the sentence would be other disorders include heart disease and foot problems, which means nothing. So in that case, you need that clause there, and so you have to introduce it via that. Okay? You see the difference. Is it clear? You cannot put this phrase here, which co-occur with diabetes, in commas. Because if you take it away, the meaning of the sentence changes dramatically. Actually, it has no meaning in this particular case if you take it away. Okay, so in one of the courses that I did, of course, I had this Irish student who wrote me this mail, which I also found very funny because he says, by the way, in British English, I am Irish and we tend to write like them. Not necessarily, but it's okay to use either that or which with defining clauses, although I had never actually realized that it's considered wrong in American English until you pointed it out in my abstract. So I went to look for this, and actually he is right. Okay, so there are websites of linguists or whatever, and it says in British English that and which can both be used for restrictive clauses, allowing for a bit more flexibility, but in both forms of the language, non-restrictive clauses are only written with which. So that cannot be used in between commas. But even the British linguists say, if you want to avoid confusion, use that for restrictive clauses and which for non-restrictive clauses. But this is a matter of style for restrictive clauses, okay? So my suggestion is to abide by the rule that I told you, so at least you're sure you won't be wrong. Another frequent mistake for foreigners is the misuse of singular antecedents. So you shouldn't use they or their when the subject is singular. So this forces you in some cases to make a gender choice, his, her, that kind of thing, and that becomes a nuisance. So the solution here is to turn everything into plural. Okay, so for example, each student worries about their grade. That's wrong because each is singular and their is plural, right? So this is decidedly a wrong construction. So if you want it right, you should say each student worries about her or his grade. So that's correct, but it's a bit long and not particularly nice. So the best way is all students worry about their grades. So you just turn the subject into plural, okay? This is a horrible mistake, and science is full of it, to use a lot of nouns as modifiers. So you can use a noun as an adjective to modify another noun, okay? That's, for example, child care center. These are 3 nouns, okay? Child care center. But it's already become like a standard of use way of calling asilo, no, a child care center. That's how you call it. But we also construct sentences where oftentimes to spare a few words, we put a lot of nouns one in front of the other, and it becomes almost impossible to read, okay? So again, if it's used carefully, it's a good thing, but the overuse of noun to modify other nouns leads to really bad constructions. For example, foliar injury increases with simulated acid rainfall application duration. Now, this kind of thing you find all over in the scientific literature, even in the titles of articles, and it really makes it difficult to understand. Aside from sounding very wrong, okay? You could say foliar injury increases with the length of time that simulated acid rainfall is applied. At least you know what you're talking about. Of course, you've introduced some words here, okay? So the use of nouns as modifiers is in fact one of the techniques that people use to use less words, but it does introduce very, very ugly constructions. So you should use it very sparingly. And this is one of the most frequent mistakes that you find in scientific writing. Much and many are not equivalent words also. Many is used for discrete single objects that you can, concrete objects, okay? Such as people, glasses, or books, or test tubes, or whatever. Much is instead used for continuums, such as discussion, information, I don't know, stuff that is not identifiable, concrete, okay? So there are many people here. You drank many glasses of wine last night. But if you're talking in general, you could say there is much discussion about that topic, or I had much wine last night. Okay, so wine is not something that you can pinpoint. You can pinpoint the glass of wine, the bottle of wine, but wine per se is a continuum, okay? This is another very difficult one to, this is something that really you learn by practice, okay? The article usage, the use of the is very different from the way we use articles in Italian, not to talk about German's der, die, das, which is really difficult. I don't know if you've ever approached the German language. I used to be married to a German gentleman, and it's a nightmare. The gentleman and the language. But that's my problem. Or even worse, like Slavic languages. I used to have both. My parents were, my mother was Croatian and my father was from Bosnia. And they, in the Serbo-Croatian language, you do not have articles in any of these languages. I think Russian doesn't have articles either. So they speak without articles. And so it's very, very difficult for them to learn the use of articles in any language. And in fact, I used to tease them. I used to say that after 9 o'clock in the evening, they lost the articles because they would just give up and talk without articles. And it's very frequent, actually, when you hear Slavic citizens speaking, they miss out on the articles because they don't exist. So they don't want to make mistakes, and so they just leave them out. So English also has its rules, and some of them are easy to let's say communicate, but really you learn by trial and error. I mean, this is something that you have to speak the language, listen to the language, and eventually it will become part of your let's say nature. But so, for example, this is an email that I received from the administration. Somebody, God bless you, somebody had lost their keys or something, and so they sent the picture to everybody in the campus. This object has been found in the building 13. Wrong, in building 13. Okay, the owner can collect it at the front office. That's correct. Okay, why? I can't explain the rule, but that's just the way it is. Okay, so you have to develop. There are some rules. I will tell you some of the easy ones, but then it's up to you to learn them. So there is a little video about this, but I don't think I'm going to show it to you because I would rather go on with the lesson. You can watch it in your own time. There's also another longer one, which is even better. So I will just give you 3 rules for article usage. Of course, you have determined and undetermined article. The an is undetermined and the is determined, right? So indefinite article you use when you first use a noun, then you use the definite article. I will show you an example that makes it clear. I saw a person yesterday. So that's the first time you're introducing this person. So you use an undefined, an indefinite article. The person was sitting under a tree. So now we have identified the person, right? It's the one that you saw yesterday. So the person was sitting under a tree, any tree, okay? The first time you introduce it. The tree was very tall, same concept. It's obvious that it's the tree you were talking about. The person stood up when they saw a cat, when he saw. The they there is wrong. I had never noticed this, but the person and they don't go together. Anyways, well, actually nowadays they do, right? Sorry, I'm old, boomer. Boomer alert, as my daughters say. Okay, so the person stood up when they saw a cat. No, it should be he or she, but lately it's they. Okay, when they saw a cat, the cat, again, now you know what cat they're talking about. The cat jumped on a wall to try and catch a bird, but the bird flew off the wall. Okay, so I think the concept is clear. So the first time you introduce something, you go with an indefinite article and then you use the definite article. So the reader knows which noun you're talking about the second time around that you talk about it. Another rule, when a noun is unique, always use the definite article. So stuff like the sun, the president, the King of England, the capital city, these are unique. And so you will use the definite article, the Taj Mahal. So this uniqueness does not need to be immediately obvious. For example, you can say a car crashed into a tree. The driver was not injured. You hadn't introduced the driver, but it's obvious that it's the driver of the car. Okay, so if it's obvious, you can use the definite article. Third rule, when speaking about a noun in general, the article is left out. Okay, and then there are specific things that don't need an article, like building 13. Okay. But that you will find in the video. But stuff in general, for example, I really like eating cake. Okay, so you like any cake. You like sweets. I really like the cake you made because that's a specific cake. Okay. So again, this is another longer video. It's a very good video according to me, but it's about 20 minutes. So if you are interested, but the misusage of articles is one of the main mistakes that foreigners make. Other common mistakes in science, data. Data is plural. Okay, so data are, you could never say my data is or my data shows. Okay, it's a plural form. The singular would be datum, but it's never used. Okay, so just put the plural verb. Affect versus effect. Affect with an A is a verb and it means to influence something. The effect is a noun and it's the impact of something. There's also a verb in English which is to affect, but it means to accomplish something. And so in science it's not often used. Okay, so you will be using affect as a verb and you will be using effect as a noun. Compared to and compared with. This is an interesting one. Compared to points out similarities. So you will say, I don't know, this is the same color compared to this other, I don't know, my dress is the same color compared to yours, okay? If it's the same color. Compared with instead points out the differences, and in fact, it's the one that's mostly or should be mostly used in English, in scientific writing, sorry. Method and methodology. A method is a way of doing something. A methodology is a system of methods that is used to do something, okay? So next generation sequencing is a method. genomics is a methodology, okay, or genomics methodology, you can say. This is another one. Gene symbols. Gene symbols. You have to learn how to write gene symbols, also because people read your paper and they understand if you're talking about a human, a mouse, a DNA, an RNA, a protein, or what, by the correct use of gene symbols. If you don't use them correctly, you're going to get your readers confused, okay? So let's see what they are. Genes and transcripts. So RNA and DNA must always be italicized, always in italics, slanted. Proteins instead are written in regular font. So proteins are straight. So the same thing, the same symbol written straight or written crooked, you know, one is a nucleic acid and the other one is a protein. The species, the characters actually, if they are capitalized or if they're in small letter, depend on the species. Okay, so there, I mean, if you're working with human, mouse, rat, these are pretty easy to learn. If you're working with some weird model, you have to go and look it up. However, humans, primates, chickens, and all domestic species, so dogs and cats and so forth, everything is in capital letters in the gene, the transcript, and the protein. So this is GAPDH, this would be the DNA or the RNA, and this would be the protein, okay? Mice and rats, so rodents, the ones that are most used as animal models in the lab, genes and transcripts, only the first letter is in uppercase and the rest is in lowercase. So this is where for example, many scientific papers have both patient samples and animal models. So if you don't want to repeat 1,000 times over that you were looking for the human transcript or that you were looking for the mouse transcript, it's enough that you use the correct gene symbols, the correct writing, the correct spelling for the gene symbols, and it's immediately understandable, okay? So instead in the protein, be careful here because it's different, everything is in capital letters. So the proteins are going to be the same in humans and rodents, and instead the gene symbols are not. Then another rather widely used animal model is fish, like zebrafish or others. And here you have the full gene name. You don't have acronyms. Is italicized and in lowercase, like this. So all the letters are in lowercase for the gene and the transcript, and instead for the protein, the first letter is in uppercase, and of course it's in regular font. So very confusing, but you have to learn. I mean, I guess most of you will be working with either humans or mice, but it's important that you're careful about using the correct spelling if it's a protein or if it's a nucleic acid, and if it's a mouse or if it's a human, also particularly in the nucleic acid, right? Then other organisms have their own rules. I won't go into them, but so here's an example. Oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't correct this. I changed the fonts and got all these should be in italics. Okay, all of these should be italicized. Anyways, here you have kind of like a summary. You have Homo sapiens. Everything is capitalized. This should be italics. These are the rodents, and you see the difference. This is chicken, which is the same as humans. Then I will show you what this is. You see this is slightly different, and so forth. Xenopus is the frogs, and Daniorerio is the zebrafish. Okay, so everything has their own rules. And if you want to know what this little animal is, it's a lizard that's found in the Carolinas in the United States of America, and that's why it's called Carolinensis. And I don't know why it's interesting to know their gene symbol, but somebody evidently has been studying their genome. Okay, so do we have time for this? Yes, we have a little bit more time. So let's look into the punctuation in the English language. So punctuation marks are tools that help you to communicate clearly. And in fact, they mainly are used to separate parts of a sentence or parts of a discourse or different sentences, right? So they have different power of separation. So the comma is the weakest. Then you have the colon, which is not a piece of your intestine, it's the two dots, okay? Due punti. Then you have the dash, Then you have the parentheses, the semicolon, punto e virgola, and the period. Okay, and this is, they have an inverse power of separation. Clearly, the period is the one that separates two sentences, and instead the comma is the weakest in terms of separation. So you can use commas to separate two independent clauses that are linked by a coordinating conjunction. So if you have a compound sentence, for example, you can use and, but with a comma. And the rule in English is, no, not here. I'll show you an example later. You can use a comma after an introductory phrase or clause. So you start at the beginning, put a comma, and then you go on. You can also use a comma before and after a parenthetical phrase or clause, like the ones with which that we saw before, where you don't put a parentheses, but you put two commas. Or items in a series. This is perhaps the most used in science, okay? So for independent clauses, the rule is the following. If you have different independent clauses with different verbs, you will need the comma only if it's more than two verbs. For example, iguanas make nice pets and take up little space. You don't need a comma there. It would be wrong. Instead, if you say iguanas make nice pets, take up little space, and are tidy, so more than two, you need the commas to separate the clauses. In English, there is such a thing. I've had a lot of discussions about this with colleagues when writing in Italian, because in Italian, actually, the same rule exists, except it is it's not obligatory. Let's say, well, it's not obligatory in English either. It's just not frequently used, but the same problem exists. So to avoid confusion, when you separate a series of things with comma, you should include a comma between the next to last and the last item in the series. This is called the Oxford comma or the serial comma, okay? So in theory, before the and, you don't need a comma, okay? It's correct to eliminate that comma, but it can create a lot of ambiguity. So the suggestion that most linguists give is to use this, to always use the serial comma regardless, okay? So, for example, you can say she is considering working in New York, Columbus, or Taos. And this, the first one has the Oxford comma, as you see. And the second one doesn't. She is considering working in New York, Columbus, or Taos. Well, in this particular case, there is no confusion, no ambiguity, because these are three different cities, right? Located in three different parts. So, no ambiguity whatsoever. But there are situations where there is ambiguity. For example, what did you have for breakfast? I had eggs, toast, and orange juice with the serial comma, okay? Or you could write, I had eggs, toast, and orange juice. But you could think that you put the orange juice on the toast. Okay, in this case, it's, of course, a bit, again, American. But imagine if instead of orange juice, it was marmalade. Okay? Or if it was, I don't know, bacon or something else. Is the bacon separate or is the bacon on the toast? So it doesn't, it's not very clear. I'll give you a more emphatic example. A child is asked to write who her favorite people are. I love my parents, Wonder Woman, and Superman. Or I love my parents, Wonder Woman, and Superman without the Oxford comma, which is also correct. But you could think that her parents are Wonder Woman and Superman. Okay, of course, in this particular instance, again, no. But you are introducing a level of ambiguity. Do you see? Okay, parentheses. The parentheses are used to insert detail. Parentheses are used a lot in scientific writing, so you have to use them carefully. Whatever is included in the parentheses should not be necessary for the sentence. So you can take it out and the meaning remains the same. So if you remove the material within parentheses, the sentence shouldn't change. And remember that parentheses are giving permission to the reader to skip over and go. Okay, so never introduce important stuff in parentheses. Okay, the colon. Colon is used to separate an independent clause from a list or an amplifying idea. So, for example, I have found 3 kinds of reptiles make terrific pets: turtles, snakes, and iguanas. Okay, so you are introducing a list. This we do very often in science, okay? Or an amplifying idea. You want to emphasize something. I have found that one kind of reptile makes a terrific pet: the iguana. Okay, so you want to point it out. You want to, because you could also say, I have found that the iguana makes a terrific pet, but that's not as emphatic, okay? The dash. The dash is often misused, and the dash is actually a very nice punctuation mark. I like it very much. First of all, a dash is different from a hyphen, okay? So even from a visual point of view, the dash is the long one. The hyphen is the brief one. And the dash in most word processors appears automatically if you introduce it in a piece of writing. It appears after the word following the dash, okay? So when you type, what you type is this little thing, then you write the next word, you go the space, and the dash appears, okay? So use the dash to add emphasis or to insert an abrupt definition or description almost anywhere. It has more or less the same value as the parentheses, with the difference that it's not stuff that can be eliminated. On the contrary, it's stuff that you want to emphasize, okay? So it's a powerful punctuation mark, and it's nice, actually. It introduces movement into your sentences. Just don't overuse it, because if every sentence has the dashes, then it loses its effectiveness, okay? So a dash is a mark of separation, stronger than a comma, less formal than a colon, and more relaxed than a parentheses. Use a dash only when, this is from a book, I don't agree, I use it often. Use a dash only when a more common mark of punctuation seems inadequate. Okay, these are examples. The drugs did more than prevent new fat accumulation. They also triggered overweight mice to shed significant amounts of fat, dash, up to half of their body weight. You could use a colon, you could use a comma, you could use a parenthesis, okay? But this is an alternative which moves your writing. To establish that the marrow cells, also called adult stem cells or endothelial precursor cells, can colonize the eye, Friedlander and his colleagues first transplanted stem cells from an adult mouse into the eyes of newborn mice. Okay, so here you're giving a definition, for example, in a sentence that already contains other commas. And so if you had set it off in commas, there would be too many commas. Okay, in general, in Italian, we use a lot of commas, much more than they do in English. So commas would generate long, heavy sentences, and instead here you break it down. Parentheses would, on the other hand, bury the information, which is, according to you, important information, which should be read. So the hyphen instead, what is that? Well, when do you use the hyphen in English? In Italian, we use it mostly to divide words at the end of a line when they don't fit, to divide syllables. That's not done in English. Okay, that's really not done. Hyphens are used to join words or parts of words. They are absolutely not interchangeable with dashes, so be careful about how you use them, okay, how you write them. You can use hyphens, for example, to make compound words like father-in-law, babysitter, postbox. Many of these words have, in common usage, become single words. Like babysitter, you can write it without the hyphen, but originally that's the way it was created, from uniting two words, okay? You should use it actually to separate prefixes like the vice president, the ex-husband, okay? Prefixes that are not complete words should always be separated by hyphen. This is something that in science is often used, wrongly, I have to say, to create compound modifiers before a noun. For example, a well-known local singer will perform tonight. So well-known should be separated by a dash. So if it's before the noun that you're modifying, because the noun is the singer, you should use the dash. But if you want to say it putting the modifier after the noun, it doesn't need the dashes. So the singer performing tonight is well known without the dash. You see, so when it comes before, it's with the dash. When it comes after, it's without. So you should be careful. That's perhaps the only thing you should really be careful. And also, of course, when you're writing numbers or figures like 68, 3/4, that kind of stuff uses hyphens. Okay, the semicolon is a nice punctuation mark, underestimated in both in English and Italian. And you can use it to join two independent clauses and avoid using a conjunction. So, for example, you can say, my iguana wandered off, semicolon. I peered anxiously into every corner of the house. You could also write, my iguana wandered off and I peered anxiously into every corner of the house, of course, but first, perhaps the first one is a bit fancier. So, semicolons in scientific writing are often used in figure legends to separate items that can turn internal punctuation. Okay, so for example, if you want to separate the different panels, you say panel A shows this, that, and the other of 10 genes, and then you say, you know, a list of genes separated by commas. Then how do you separate it from panel B? You use a semicolon, okay? So if you're separating sentences that have a lot of commas, you can use the semicolon. This is creepy. Okay. So also you have to use a semicolon when you want to separate sentences that are joined by one of these conjunctive adverbs, these transition words, or transition words like consequently, finally, furthermore, however. So this is always going to be preceded by a semicolon, okay? And then a comma follows the conjunctive adverb. So you're going to say a statement, semicolon, therefore, blah, blah, blah. So my iguana wandered off. Nevertheless, I didn't worry because I knew she would return. Okay, so this is it for today. Are there any questions, comments? Or are you okay? You're still awake? This is a good result at this hour of the day? Sure. I have the PDFs. Well, I will send everything to Richa, okay? And so that she can circulate them to everybody. Okay. Prego. Okay, so are the people from who are on Teams, is everything okay? Anything you didn't understand? You want to are there questions? Otherwise, we see each other tomorrow. Same place, same time. And if anybody who's on Teams wants to join us, we are in Humanitas, Building A, Room 5, 2 o'clock. We will be happy if you join. Good night. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
too.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Bye.
Okay.